On the other side of the yard. Early one September morning, the summer my husband and I moved from New York to Los Angeles, we saw a couple we almost knew lose their son at a park about a mile from our house. We saw him climb a high tree. We saw him fall to the ground. We saw everyone circle around. By the time we got over there, a woman was performing CPR. Someone else had called for an ambulance. "Keep trying," the mother, whose name we remembered was Brittany, said. She was lying on the ground next to the boy. She was not crying. We understood this meant she was in shock. Her husband stood back, watching. He was the one who had been standing under the tree, smiling up at the boy when he fell. All morning my husband had been annoyed with me. We were there with our 2-year-old daughter. There was a baby squirrel running around the park, making a screaming sound. It ran up one man's leg, then back down again. "It needs help," I said. "It's going to hurt someone, a kid." The older kids were chasing it around, laughing each time it screamed. "This is too stressful," my husband said. "Can't you just relax?" He said. "It'll run away," he said, spotting our daughter as she climbed up the slide. "It's just a squirrel. Leave it alone." I tried to relax, but the screaming. "I'm going to call someone," I said after a while. My husband rolled his eyes. It was true, I did lean a bit too heavily on the police. I called for suspicious cars parked on our street, noises in the night, neighbors having heated disputes in the middle of the afternoon. They put me through to the Department of Animal Services, who said there was nothing they could do for an uninjured wild animal. I went back to my husband, who received this news as smugly as I thought he would. He'd been pushing our daughter on the swing for 30 minutes. If you've ever done it, then you know. There's nothing in the world more boring than pushing a child on a swing for 30 minutes. I was thankful that it was the weekend, that it was my husband's arms, not mine, doing the pushing. "Don't look now," my husband said, prompting me to immediately turn my head and look. He went on with a sigh. "Isn't that the family who came to our house?" he said, "for the table?" I looked again, this time as if to take in the park. The large weeping willow trees, a mother yelling at her kid on the play structure, a baby getting his diaper changed in the grassy area, and oh, thank God, someone else cared, a young father luring the baby squirrel out of a tree with some nuts and a bucket. Then yes, there was the family who came to our house a month before. Their son was fast on the stairs. At the top of the slide, he held the bar and swung. We were selling an old dining room table that we'd brought with us from New York. Turned legs, pine. It had belonged to my first husband's grandmother. After he died, I held on to it out of loyalty, but now I'd read a book on letting things go. Hold it in your hands, the book had suggested of everything, and ask yourself if it brings you joy. It was an easy enough question, but a hard thing to know. What in your life really brought you joy? The woman responded to the ad we posted on Craigslist within minutes. My husband arranged a time for them to come, and on Saturday morning, promptly at 9 o'clock, they pulled up in front of our house in an old pickup truck. The woman was about 25 with wild hair. She got out of the truck, then released a young boy who had the same wild hair from the back. I was reluctant about letting people into our home. I'd read the statistics on burglaries, how most of the time it was someone you knew, a maid, a gardener, a neighbor. But in the emails, the woman was polite. She signed off, "Take good care," which felt somehow like the voice of an old friend. Behind her, a young man dragged his feet as he walked. He wore big sneakers, baggy jeans. His dark hair was covered by a baseball cap that he had tipped sideways. The hat read, was it? Yes. "What up, bitches?" "Come on in," I said, smiling. The woman looked back at the young man. Her face was pretty. Green eyes, freckles. "This is Jack," she said. "I'm Brittany." She scooped up her son and walked into the house. My husband came over from the other side of the room. "It's just back here," he said, "in the yard. We have it outside, but it's covered. There hasn't been rain in a while, so—" Brittany walked with my husband. Jack and I followed behind. Our daughter showed him her wooden puppy. When she pulled the string to walk it, its ears flapped and its tail wagged. "Puppy," she said to Jack. He got down to her level and smiled. "Is this your puppy?" he said. "Is this your little doggie?" He took the string and pulled the dog along. My daughter was delighted. She buried her face in my leg and laughed. "You look familiar," I heard Brittany say to my husband. This happened a lot since he was on Lost. Most people recognized him, but no one could ever quite place him. He was always cast as the weirdo in everything he did. The mad scientist, the cult leader, or for the indie he was filming now, he played the teacher who was suspected of taking the kid. For this role, he had to grow his hair long. On weekends, he wore it in a low ponytail. "You do too," I heard my husband say. "Then here she is, a beauty," he said, "solid pine." It was silent for a moment, then, "belonged to my grandmother," he added. I caught his eye, surprised to hear this false history. The three of them walked around the table, sliding their fingers over the top. "Look at those turned legs," my husband said. "They don't make them like this anymore." Brittany bent and looked at the underside of the table. "We've been looking for one like this," she said. She examined the joinery, the screws. She gave it a little shake, then ran her hand over the surface again. "A little rough," she said. "Rustic," my husband said. She looked at Jack. "What do you think, babe?" she said. "Up to you," Jack said, taking in the yard. He looked at my husband and said, "I don't get involved." My husband smiled. "I hear you, buddy," he said. After a minute, Brittany said to Jack, "It'll be your table too," she said. She went to him and pulled him by the arm. "Come on," she said. "Sit down. Let's see if it fits." My husband rested his hand on my back. "Let us get out of your way," he said to Brittany. "Take as long as you want." He was the only man who'd come anywhere near me after September 11. He was not afraid of it, my pain. What I didn't know before was that people avoid people who have been through a trauma as if it's contagious. It was not contagious. If you talked to me, your husband was not going to be blown to pieces in a falling tower. For a while, there was a certain comfort in the collective grieving of the entire world, but then the entire world moved on. Through the window in the kitchen, we could see them at the table. Jack sat down at one end, Brittany at the other. Their son had found the trampoline, and he was jumping over on the other side of the yard. We watched them. Brittany smiled at Jack, blushing. It seemed they were brand new to each other, like she was still nervous around him, still trying to win him in some essential way he'd not yet been won. She tapped her long nails on the tabletop, laughed each time he spoke. Their lips were moving. We couldn't make out what they were saying, but anyone could see that it was flirtation. I looked at my husband. He looked at me. We both looked away. A few minutes later, they were all inside again. "We love it," Brittany said. "Would you take 600? I felt something inside of me shift, a coolness spill into my jaw. "Oh," I said, "I don't know," I said. "We mentioned in the ad that the price was firm." It was quiet for a moment. No one said anything. Then I added, $1,000 is fair for this table. If anything, it's low," I said. "We don't have 1,000, Jack said, "but we have 600 in cash right here," he said, flashing money from his wallet. He looked at my husband and lifted his eyebrows. "If you could help me get it into my truck," he said, "we can take it off of your hands right now." "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my head. "This belonged to my husband's grandmother." I pictured him then, my first husband, at his spot on the side of the table. He liked to sit there on weekend mornings and eat sugary cereal from a giant coffee mug. My husband lowered his eyes. I saw a terrible sadness fall over Brittany's face. She moved closer to Jack. "That's okay," she said in a soft voice. "We understand," she said. She scooped up her son and they made their way through the house and out the front door. My husband sat on the couch and stared at the television. I sat beside him without saying anything. "You could have just given it to them," he said finally. "It's $400, he said. "Who cares?" "People think they can take whatever they want," I said. "You can't just give it to them." Now, a month later, we stood near the tree with everyone else watching. My husband took our daughter for a walk to get her away from what was happening. By the time the ambulance arrived, the boy's curly hair was covered in blood. He had not moved. The EMTs tried to resuscitate him, then gave up. When they stopped, Brittany's face turned red, purple. She ran to Jack and started slapping at him. She screamed. She punched at his chest with the balls of her hands. She dug her long nails into his cheeks and scratched down. "What did you do?" she screamed. "What did you do?" Jack stood still and let her beat him. After a moment, an EMT pulled her away, covered her shoulders with a blanket, sat her down in the shade of a willow tree. As this was happening, 2 other men moved the boy onto a stretcher. Brittany did not move. She sat there still. Her eyes were closed, her body rocking. I wondered if she was meditating, saying a prayer. I knew that a part of her was escaping, forever leaving this broken place. I went to her, touched her shoulder. She looked up at me, her green eyes scanning, confused, frightened. "I know you," I said.